We are heading into a very busy week in the NBA with the NBA draft coming up on Thursday, which is sure to be busy with trades, trade rumors. You also have players and teams due for extensions prior to the start of free agency on June 30th. For the Bulls, more specifically, the impending extension of Nikola Vucevic or his impending free agency if they don't reach an agreement. But over the weekend, we did get our first major trade of the offseason in Bradley Beal getting moved to the Phoenix Suns, and in my opinion is a surprising move, one in which I think is actually not going to pan out well for the Suns. I made a whole video on that on the second channel that I uploaded earlier this morning, but also just a god-awful trade for the Wizards in giving up their franchise player for essentially some second-round picks, using it as a salary dump and getting some second-round draft capital in return is horrendous. But either way, in this video, we're going to be talking about how if this trade actually impacts the Bulls and any future trades they are looking to make this offseason. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, I talked about this last week after it was announced that the Wizards and Beal and his agent would work with him to find him a trade that if and when Beal does get moved, that it's going to set the trade market for this upcoming season. Similar to how when the Spurs traded DeJounte Murray to the Hawks for 3 first-round picks, it set the market for what a fringe all-star in the NBA is worth last offseason. Whether it be fair value or not is debatable. I personally think that was an overpay, which was then followed up by a gross overpay of the Wolves giving up 5 first-round picks for Rudy Gobert. But either way, it set the trade market for that offseason and how much certain players were going to cost in a trade. Now, as I also mentioned, though, for Bradley Beal, a little bit different. And actually, I shouldn't say a little different. It was very different when you consider the fact that the man had a no-trade clause in his contract that severely limits a team like the Wizards and their leverage to be able to move him in a trade, because Beal can dictate wherever he wants to go in order for him to agree to waive that no-trade clause. When your hands are tied and at the mercy of moving a player to wherever he wants to go and the team you're trying to trade him to knows that, it means you're likely going to get minimal value for him in return, because why would said team that he wants to be traded to offer up the world if they know they're only bidding against themselves? But here's the thing, and I know I'm getting a little off topic here. I had a lot of people say to me on Twitter after I was baffled by the package the Wizards were able to get in return for their franchise player. So many people telling me, what do you expect? Beal was controlling the trade. The Wizards' hands were tied. The fact that they were even able to dump his salary is a win in and of itself. And to that I reply, no, it's actually not. I get that his value is going to be hampered because of the no-trade clause. I get that the return isn't going to be as good as a result of it. But what most people are missing is that the Wizards didn't have to trade Beal so quickly. If they knew Beal wanted to go to the Suns and only the Suns, and they knew the Suns were the only team they were going to be in discussions with, they could have at least tried to play hardball and held out for the best offer possible and tell Beal, hey, sorry, you're staying until we get what we want. As much as Beal did have control in the trade because of the no-trade clause, the Wizards have the ultimate say in actually making the trade happen. They don't have to trade a player they have under contract. So yes, I was baffled by how little the Wizards were able to get in the trade and why they didn't hold out for a better offer, considering we still have the whole offseason in front of us. It's not like we're just about to start going into training camp right now. But either way, Beal is heading to the Suns. The Wizards, you would think anyway, are likely going to be going into a full-blown rebuild. So what does it mean for the Chicago Bulls? How does this impact their offseason? Well, it actually impacts it for a number of reasons, and I'll start with how it changes things from a trade perspective. We've all been talking about the potential value of a player like Lavine and what he could get you in a trade. It was reported the Bulls were gauging interest around the league in Zach's trade value. What could they potentially get for him in return for a player who is their most valuable trade asset at this point? And while it's been floated around the idea that the Bulls are looking to trade up in the draft for that number 3 pick with Portland and maybe even some potential other assets, which I still think can be the case, the fact is that Beal was traded for so little is not good for Zach's overall trade value. And while I know some will say, well, you can't compare the two, the trade market between these is apples to oranges, but you can consider Beal has a no trade clause. He's on a larger contract. He's 2 years older and has also been injury prone the last 3 seasons. Yeah, obviously Zach's trade value is going to be much higher than a player like Bradley Beal. But despite the fact that it is higher and the Bulls aren't limited in having their hands tied to move him, given they aren't bounded by a no-trade clause, as different as the situations are, it still does guide his overall value in a trade. And even the Beal trade aside, I think a lot goes back to last offseason and teams being wary of mortgaging their future on one player. The Hawks, Timberwolves, and even the Cavs traded multiple first-round picks and young players for an all-star. And all they saw or first-round exits in the playoffs as a result of it. So while the return the Wizards got from Beal isn't as indicative of what the Bulls could potentially get for Zach Lavine, it is noteworthy based on how much teams are going to be wary of going all in for a player like him. And even though Beal's trade value is significantly lower than Zach Lavine, at any rate, it still establishes a baseline. And for a team that was hoping to receive this massive haul for a player like Zach and maybe get away with what other teams were able to achieve last offseason, that simply is not going to be the case this year. And even Lavine aside, that can also inform what the trade market is for players like DeMar DeRozan or even Nikola Vucevic. Now, the trade market, let's put that aside for a second. How else does this impact the Bulls and their offseason? Well, it could open up some potential opportunities as it relates to players that could be on the move or available on their respective teams. I can't see Kyle Kuzma remaining on the Wizards. He was already likely to decline his player option for the final year of his contract, but rather than re-signing with the Wizards, who are looking to rebuild, I see him now likely being available on the free agent market. The only problem there is he's likely going to command too much money that the Bulls just don't have. Thus, it would have to be in the form of a sign-and trade of some kind to be able to land him. And at what point is it too much to trade for Kyle Kuzma if you're the Bulls? That said, the Wizards just threw away Beal, so maybe the Bulls could get Kuzma for pennies on the dollar. The other player, though, to keep an eye on is Kristaps Porzingis, who also has a player option, which I would expect he will now also decline to become an unrestricted free agent and go to another team. Although his player option is at $36 million, which I can't see any team offering him that kind of money, at least on an annual basis, but he could be looking for a more long-term lucrative deal. But even if Porzingis picks up his player option, I could see the Wizards looking to trade him for pennies on the dollar for an expiring contract. So yet another player to keep an eye on. And then also DeAndre Ayton. The reason Ayton could very well be on the move is simply due to the fact that the Suns, now after making that trade for Bradley Beal, between 4 players, Kevin Durant, Booker, Ayton, and now Beal, their salaries combined for this upcoming season total $162 million. That not only puts them over the salary cap, but also at the luxury tax line. For just 4 players at $162 million gives them little flexibility to add pieces and depth around those guys. Filling out the roster when they have little money to spend is going to be a challenge. Thus, in comes DeAndre Ayton, who has been a player in trade rumors for some time now and not being happy with the organization. Trading Ayton is the only way the Suns can make meaningful changes to add depth to their roster, which they're going to need because as talented as they are in the starting lineup, you can't have a G League level bench to actually help you win a title. It just doesn't work that way. Thus, it's very possible Ayton could be on the move, which would also be another option to keep an eye on for the Bulls. I do still think a trade for Ayton is unlikely because the Bulls would have to give up Vucevic in a sign-and trade and another role player or two to make the money work, and does bringing in a player like Ayton, who has had severe attitude and motivation issues, really upgrade the overall roster for the Bulls? I mean, yeah, he's young, a lot younger than Vucevic, which is nice, but I don't see it really moving the needle for the Bulls, especially when you consider Ayton is even more limited when it comes to spacing the floor and shooting, which the Bulls need more than anything. And then finally, the other player that could be a buyout candidate on the move is Chris Paul. Can't see him agreeing to stay with the Wizards in the final years of his career. He's going to want to go to a contender, which is not the Bulls. Let's be clear on that. And I find it very unlikely CP3 would end up in a Bulls uniform next season, but I wouldn't say it's out of the realm of possibility given the relationship with Billy Donovan, the fact that the Bulls need a point guard, and the fact that the Bulls are a big market for Chris Paul. Again, a lot of it depends on the direction the Bulls take. Do they do another push to win now, cling on to continuity? Because if they tear it down and rebuild themselves, all of these players I just mentioned are likely out of the window for the Bulls. Now, do I think that any of these players that could be on the move coming from the Bradley Beal trade be a good option for the Bulls? Not really. Maybe to an extent Kuzma, because it gives the Bulls some size and depth at the 4 and some outside shooting. I guess the same could be said for Porzingis, but both of these guys are going to command too much money that the Bulls won't be able to afford and quite frankly probably are not worth. But that doesn't mean the Bulls front office won't think otherwise. They may try and take advantage of the Wizards' fire sale and see if they can get in on them throwing players away for little value. Anyway, really from here on out, every league transaction could have implications on the Bulls, so I guess you can't really say this one is any more significant than others, but it is noteworthy given it's the first major trade of the offseason. I would love to hear what you guys think though of the trade and any potential interest in some of these players that are likely to be on the move if they end up making sense for the Chicago Bulls. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.